My guest today has been a tech insider for decades. He's worked at NASA and developed one of the first augmented reality systems for the US Air Force after studying at Stanford. Rosenberg is the founder of several companies, one of which made the first ever desktop 3D digitizer, which was used in the production of many movies including Shrek, Ice Age, and A Bug's Life. He's also known for starting Unanimous AI, which allows people to amplify their group intelligence by using the phenomenon known in biology as swarm intelligence. It's a unique approach combining the intuitive power of humans with the compute power of AI to find better decisions and make much more accurate predictions. My talk with Lewis will be uploaded in 3 parts. This is the first one, and it's about his story and how the VR industry has changed since he entered it in the 90s. If you're new to the Utopian podcast, welcome. Please consider following the UPod on whichever platform you're using and sharing it with your friends. And don't forget to check out my website at theutopian.blog for more. Really a pleasure to have you on the show. And I want to start by learning about how you got where you are today in the AI and augmented reality fields. So we can begin with what you studied in university.
Sure. So I did my undergraduate and my graduate work at Stanford in the late 80s and early 90s. And my interest was really in human-computer interaction, how we can use computers to amplify human capabilities. And that's really been the central theme of all the academic work and professional work that I've done over the last 30 years. For the first half of my career was really focused on virtual reality, augmented reality, and then over the last decade has also been very focused on artificial intelligence. In 1991, I was a graduate student at Stanford. I was very interested in virtual reality. And so I was lucky enough to get a part-time job working at NASA in a virtual reality lab. And I was studying some of the basic parameters of vision systems. I felt like, yeah, this technology is amazing, but it feels like I'm cut off from another part of my world. And all I could think about when I was working on those early VR systems was, I wish I could take the power of virtual reality and put it all over the real world. And so I proposed that idea to the U.S. Air Force, and was lucky enough to convince them to create a system after my time doing that project, to say, hey, I should start a company that's working in this field. And so in 1993, I founded a virtual reality company called Immersion. That company's actually still around today. I left in 2002, so a while ago, but I ran Immersion Corporation from 1993 to the early 2000s, focusing on virtual reality. And so that was my experience in VR, and after that I have been working in AR and AI as well.
Yeah, and I do actually, that's a pretty interesting point. It's really cool that you've seen, the VR and AR industries evolve through their different stages already since the 80s and 90s. And in one of your Medium posts, you described there being this enormous enthusiasm for VR and the metaverse already in the late 80s, until there came this VR winter between the end of the 90s and 2012, only to be reignited now as like the hottest topic in tech, in the last year. So what do you think caused that winter to start, and what do you think caused it to end?
Yeah, so it's for a lot of people, it's hard to believe, but there was a lot of VR activity happening in the early 90s. The first, the phrase VR, I think, was coined in 87. There were activity started in a few startups and at NASA and a few other universities, 87 to 90, 91, 92. By the early 90s, there were quite a few startups. There was a vibrant industry excited about virtual reality. There were trade shows, there were conferences, there were journals. by 1994, 1995, the cover of Wired magazine would say, virtual reality is the next big thing. And so if, for myself, I started working in 91, and by 93, I was running a company in this space. And then, like most people in the space back then, I really believed that virtual reality would be ubiquitous by the end of that decade. By 1999, 2000, I thought it's going to be everywhere. And in 93, 94, 95, it was really progressing, getting hotter. 96, and then everything changed in 96. And between 96 and 97, it basically went from the hottest technology that there was to almost a dirty word in Silicon Valley, where you couldn't mention it. And the reason that happened was the internet. In 1996, 1997 was the start of the dot-com boom, the dot-com bubble. Every venture capitalist, every tech entrepreneur wanted to be working on internet technologies. The internet and dot-coms became the hot thing. And the phrase virtual reality was looked at as, oh yeah, that was that thing we were excited about before, and now it must have failed because it hasn't happened yet. And so from basically from 1997 until 2012, it was what I would call the VR winter, where you could not use that phrase with investors or even with consumers and not have people look at you funny. 2012, it came back.
Yeah, and what do you think is the difference between sort of the hype we're in right now versus the last one of the 80s and 90s? And why are you more certain that this time there won't be another winter and that we're actually going to be faced with, like a metaverse?
Yeah, so a lot has changed. Really the thing that reignited the industry in 2012, it actually really happened in 2007. It just took till 2012 to take off. 2007 is when Apple launched the iPhone. And in 2007, before 2007, there was lots of phones, but they weren't smartphones. By 2012, every phone was a smartphone, and flat panel screens got very, very inexpensive with really high quality graphics. Motion sensors got really, really inexpensive. GPS got really, really inexpensive. Quality processors. And so suddenly by 2012, you could make a head-mounted display, and actually at a consumer price, an expensive consumer price, but a consumer price. Also, people were at that point comfortable paying a lot for a mobile phone. And so it really, but in 2012, the market conditions allowed the hardware to happen. And over the time since, from 2012 to now, so another decade has passed, the other big change that's happened, communication speeds have gotten much, much faster. Now we're to 5G. GPUs made processing much faster, and instead of it being everything being driven by startups, it's now driven by major corporations. And so now we're in a world where the metaverse is driven by the largest companies in the world, as opposed to really enthusiastic startups. I think it's more exciting when it's driven by startups, but the major corporations will ensure that there will not be another VR winter. I think it will happen for sure. It might not happen exactly the way people imagine it, but virtual reality and augmented reality, I think, will significantly impact everybody's lives in the near future.
Yeah, and now I do want to pivot a little bit. You made a pretty interesting move in your technical career, which is after founding Immersion, you became a screenwriter for a few years. You published an excellent graphic novel called Upgrade, which is what it's like or your vision of an augmented reality metaverse in the year 2030. And I did want to ask, how would you say that your thinking about technical fields or even your entrepreneurial career has changed as a result of your explorations into like science fiction and literature?
Yeah, so I've always been a real big fan of science fiction and literature in general. And after I left my first tech company, it had gone public, and I was looking at other things to do. It was a good opportunity to try something different. And I really think of being an entrepreneur really as being a storyteller anyway. If you're a tech entrepreneur, you see a vision for the future and you're telling that story and you're convincing the world that story is going to happen. And by convincing the world it's going to happen, you make it happen. And at the same time, while I have been an evangelist for many technologies, I also see the downside and the scary side and the dangerous side. And science fiction is a great way to express that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with the overall point that like science fiction actually plays a much bigger role in the tech industry than most people realize. And because it often defines the goals and the visions that we aim for, including the metaverse, which actually originally came from authors like Neil Stephenson, Ernest Cline, and so on. Yeah, and of course, it's also a great way to evaluate the big picture questions like, are we going in the right direction? I hope you enjoyed this episode of the UPod. If you did, please give a like if you're on YouTube, and follow the UPod on whichever platform you prefer. That's Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts. If you want to learn more, go to www.theutopian.blog and join my newsletter. I also share exclusive interview highlights, infographics, and community events which you can join all on my Instagram at the.utopian.blog and on my LinkedIn page, The Utopian. I'm always open to being messaged on any of those platforms if you ever want to get in touch. I really appreciate your support, and I hope to see you next time.